There are places in America where the quiet feels heavy, as if the air itself remembers things people would rather forget. In the far northern edge of Louisiana, only a few miles from the Arkansas border, sits a neighborhood that once seemed ordinary to the families who lived there. It was the kind of place where children drifted in and out of one another's yards, where afternoons melted into early evenings beneath the weight of humid southern air, and where nothing truly terrible was ever supposed to happen. But on a Saturday afternoon in early March of 1997, that illusion began to crack. 13-year-old Shannon Capers stepped out of her family's apartment and into the soft sunlight. She wasn't dressed for anything special, just a teenager moving through her weekend, heading toward town the way she had countless times before. She was known, she was loved, she had friends who expected to see her. Nothing about that day suggested she wouldn't return home. She walked the familiar sidewalk that led toward the busier part of town, picking her steps through the loose gravel that collected along the edges of the neighborhood. She passed the small patches of woods behind the complex, the same woods everyone knew but few bothered to wander into. They were thick, unkempt, and crawled with shadows even on bright afternoons. Shannon kept going. And then, somewhere along her route, the world simply lost track of her. 6 hours passed. The sun slid lower in the sky, stretching shadows across porches and yards. Inside the Capers' home, worry began to take shape. When Shannon still wasn't home by dusk, that worry bloomed into panic. Parents know instinctively when something is wrong. That night, the Capers family wasn't guessing, they felt it in their bones. They called the local police. The report was logged. The case was transferred to juvenile detective Ben Booth, a man used to dealing with runaways, miscommunications, and tense families praying their children were safe. But this case didn't feel like the others. Something was missing, not just a child, but the usual trail of clues that most children, intentionally or not, tend to leave behind. Shannon had vanished without a ripple. Detective Booth began the familiar process, talking to friends, classmates, neighbors, anyone who might have seen Shannon on that warm March afternoon. The teens she knew well shrugged helplessly. No strange cars, no sudden arguments, no plans gone sideways. It was like she stepped off the edge of the world. 3 days passed, then 4, another sunrise, another nightfall. With each hour, the chances of finding Shannon safe slipped further away. Detective Booth contacted the local news, pushing her photo into the community's living rooms. Networks broadcast her image, a bright-eyed 13-year-old with a life full of possibility. Booth also entered her information into NCIC, the National Crime Information Center database, a digital net stretching across the country, designed to catch cases just like this. And then the silence arrived. Days folded into weeks. Weeks bled into months. One season gave way to another. A single year became 2. By the spring of 1999, the absence of answers had hardened into a cold, unyielding reality. Shannon Capers was still gone, and no one could say why. Detective Booth moved on to new cases, new faces, new crises. But Shannon's file never left his mind. Investigators carry certain cases with them forever, the ones that refuse to be forgotten. Shannon's disappearance was one of them. Then, on a quiet day in early May, another detective, Chris Smith, sat at his desk, shuffling paperwork, when the phone rang. It wasn't unusual for someone to call in a lead. What was unusual was what the voice on the other end said. The caller spoke Shannon's full name. She said she knew where the girl was. She said the body was buried in the woods behind the apartment complex Shannon once called home. She named the man responsible, a local drug dealer named Maurice Tate. Detective Smith leaned forward in his chair, heart tightening. He asked for a callback number, a way to trace the information, a reason to believe she wasn't lying. The caller hung up. Minutes later, the entire department shifted into action. A search team assembled and pushed into the woods behind the complex, combing through more than 10 acres of tangled brush and uneven ground. Investigators raked through leaves, shifted branches aside, and dragged their boots across thick patches of mud. They marked their progress grid by grid, but by the time the sky darkened, they had found nothing. The next day passed in silence. The day after that, Detective Smith's phone rang again. The same voice, the same urgency. But this time, the caller wasn't whispering vague hints. She sounded almost offended. She told them they hadn't searched deeply enough. She insisted the body was there. She said to go back, And something in her voice, the certainty, the way her sentences carried, no hesitation, burrowed beneath the detective's skin. It didn't feel like rumor. It didn't feel like gossip. It felt like truth. A new search team formed. This time, original investigator Ben Booth joined them. They pushed deeper into the woods, expanding the search area beyond the original 10 acres. Hours passed. Another fruitless sweep. Another dead end. As the afternoon wore down, the department chief stepped aside for a moment and lit a cigar. He paced, took a few puffs, then flicked the cigar toward the ground. It landed next to something pale. He froze. Booth turned. The chief's eyes were locked on the dirt. They stared at each other for a long second, as if waiting for one another to acknowledge the impossible. A human skull lay partially hidden in the leaves, so close to the search grid that an extra footstep in the right direction would have uncovered it earlier. When they pulled back the surrounding debris, the truth revealed itself with cold clarity. There was a circular opening in the skull, a bullet wound. Someone had aimed a gun at the head of a 13-year-old girl. The remains were transported to the state forensics lab. DNA testing, still developing in the late 1990s, confirmed what the investigators already feared. The bones belonged to Shannon Capers. The case was no longer a disappearance. It was a homicide. Detectives returned to the one thing that had brought them this far, that lone, anonymous voice on the phone. Someone out there had known exactly where Shannon's body was buried. Someone had also claimed to know the man responsible. And investigators understood something critical. Killers rarely tell strangers their secrets. Whoever made that call had to be close to the suspect. They began piecing through Maurice Tate's personal life, starting with the women he had once dated. They reviewed the police reports, the medical calls, even the emergency room visits linked to domestic violence. And that's when they found her. A woman named Charnice McKnight appeared in the medical records, her injuries documented in painful detail. A black eye, bruises along her ribs, swelling across her cheek. Injuries, she told hospital staff, came from the same man now whispered about in connection to Shannon's death. Detectives subpoenaed the records. They found an address. Charnice had moved to San Antonio, Texas, building a new life hundreds of miles away from the violence she'd endured. Investigators booked a flight. It was a warm day when they knocked on her door, a knock that carried the weight of 2 years of unanswered questions. She opened the door cautiously. Her eyes widened, just a little enough to tell detectives she already knew why they had come. They stepped inside. She didn't offer information freely, but fear and guilt often sit side by side in people who have carried a secret too long. When the detectives began asking about Tate's temper, her body stiffened. When they asked about the night Shannon disappeared, her eyes filled with tears. She was 20 years old, sitting on a couch hundreds of miles from the place she once called home, struggling to decide whether telling the truth would ruin her life or finally set her free. And then, in a trembling voice, she admitted everything. She was the anonymous caller. She told them she had known the truth for years. Maurice Tate had told her on the very day Shannon vanished. He had boasted. He had threatened her. He had beaten her. He had controlled her silence through fear. But years later, after one brutal attack left her nose broken and her face bruised, something in her snapped. She went home, picked up the phone, and told what she knew anonymously at first, then fully when she could no longer carry the burden. As she cried, she revealed the darkest detail. Tate believed Shannon was pregnant, 13 years old, still a child. And that belief, she said, was motive enough for him to kill her. She described what he told her, how he took Shannon into the woods behind the apartments, how he choked her, how he fired a gun at her head, how he dug the shallow hole himself. Her words matched the physical evidence, the location, the bullet wound, the depth of the grave. It was enough for detectives to move forward, but not enough to convict. They still needed one more piece of the puzzle. They needed Tate's voice. When they brought him into the interrogation room, he didn't break easily. He admitted he had seen Shannon that day on a back road not far from the woods, but he denied hurting her. He denied killing her. He denied knowing anything about her disappearance. But then he made a mistake. He suggested they couldn't prove anything because they didn't know exactly when she had died. Only one person would know the precise moment. Only one person would understand the timeline intimately. The detectives let the silence hang in the air, heavy and intentional. That misstep, combined with Charnice's testimony, secured the arrest warrant. Maurice Tate was charged with second-degree murder and taken to Claiborne Parish Detention Center, where he waited for trial. 4 days of testimony followed. Witnesses, forensic experts, detectives, medical staff, each voice adding another thread to the tapestry of truth. When the jury finally left the room to deliberate, no one expected a swift verdict, but they returned in less than half an hour. Guilty. Second-degree murder. A mandatory life sentence. The Capers family, who had gone 2 full years without knowing where their daughter was, and another 2 without knowing who took her life, finally had an answer. Shannon was buried with dignity, with a truth finally attached to her story, with justice carried on the shoulders of those who refused to let her memory fade. Long before investigators stood in that Texas apartment listening to a young mother confess the secret she'd been hiding for years, the seeds of the tragedy had already taken root back in Louisiana. To truly understand how the case of Shannon Capers unraveled, you have to step into the world that shaped both the victim and the man accused of taking her life. Shannon grew up in a modest community tucked near Louisiana's northern border, surrounded by a patchwork of small roads, dense woods, and families who knew each other by name. It wasn't a place that expected tragedy. The rhythm of everyday life hummed quietly through the streets, kids on bicycles, neighbors chatting from porches, stray dogs weaving around garbage cans on pickup days. It was a world where parents trusted the slow hours of the afternoon, believing their children were safe as they drifted from house to house. But in 1997, that trust was shattered. When Shannon didn't return home that early March evening, panic didn't take long to settle in. Her mother moved from room to room, checking windows, checking the phone, checking the front door, as if hoping the knob might twist with her daughter's familiar touch. Her father stepped outside repeatedly, scanning the yard, the parking lot, the tree line. He kept expecting to see the silhouette of a 13-year-old girl walking toward home under the soft glow of streetlights. Instead, darkness spread across the neighborhood, and Shannon remained missing. Detective Ben Booth knew from experience that when a child disappeared, with no witnesses, no sightings, and no explanation, the usual assumptions about runaways or miscommunication rarely applied. Something far more serious was unfolding. Still, when he took the report, he followed every step of protocol. He checked schools. He interviewed friends. He reached out to neighboring parishes. He traced her daily routine, searching for even one indication she was alive. The silence troubled him. The disappearance gained local traction quickly. Within days, Shannon's schoolmates whispered her name in hallways. Teachers kept an eye on their students, worried that fear would spread faster than information. Parents clung more tightly to their children, suddenly unwilling to let them walk home alone or wander too far past sunset. The community was shaken, not just because a child was missing, but because no one had seen anything. It was as if Shannon had been plucked off the face of the earth. Detective Booth pushed the investigation forward, but the leads trickled into nothing. The search dragged on through spring, then summer. Seasons changed, and yet the case remained frozen. With every passing day, the chances of finding Shannon alive eroded. By the time 2 full years had passed, hope had thinned into resignation. People still remembered her name, but they spoke it softly, as if afraid to disturb the dead air surrounding the case. All of that changed on a single phone call. When Detective Chris Smith picked up the receiver on that early May morning in 1999, he did not expect the words that fell into his ear. The voice on the other end was almost too calm, too steady for what she claimed. She said Shannon was dead. She said the girl was buried behind the apartments where she had once lived, and she named a killer. When she hung up, something inside the detective shifted. Cold cases sometimes breathe again, but rarely like this. Rarely with a voice that sounds like it's speaking from the margins of guilt. Smith called for a search, and officers marched into the woods. 10 acres of thick growth lay ahead of them, trees clustered like silent guardians, branches interlocking in patterns that blocked the sun from hitting the ground. The soil was uneven, soft in some areas, packed hard in others. It was not the kind of place someone wandered by accident. It was the kind of place someone chose deliberately. The team combed through every foot of their assigned grid. They dug through tangled roots, peeled back wet leaves, kicked aside debris. But the woods swallowed their efforts whole. When the crew left that first day without answers, the case felt like it was slipping away again. Then the second call came, sharper, more urgent. The caller insisted they had missed something, insisted the body was still there. The voice no longer sounded like someone offering a rumor. It sounded like someone begging the truth to be found. That was enough for another search. Detectives Booth and Smith walked into the woods together the second time. They expanded the perimeter. They pushed past the 10-acre boundary. The heat clung to their clothes, and insects buzzed in circles around them. Hours passed without progress. And then the chief's cigar landed beside a skull. The discovery shook the department. Even the most seasoned detectives paused when confronted with the stark finality of human bones. There was no mistaking it. Shannon had been lying in that forest for 2 years, only yards from where officers had searched days earlier. Her remains had not been hidden well. The forest itself had done most of the concealing, swallowing her shallow grave under layers of seasonal runoff and decaying vegetation. Animals, rain, wind time had done its work. All that remained was a skull, a bullet wound, and the broken truth. Detectives knew immediately they needed to figure out who had known exactly where Shannon was buried. The list of possibilities was short. The anonymous caller had to be intimately connected to the man she named. Maurice Tate was not a stranger to police. He had a reputation in the area, mostly revolving around drugs, occasional violence, and an attitude that danced on the edge of fearlessness and recklessness. He was the kind of man who believed consequences were things that happened to other people. But even a man like Tate had weaknesses. The investigators knew domestic abusers rarely keep their violence entirely secret. Somewhere in the tangle of his past relationships, there would be someone who knew the truth. That someone was Sharnice McKnight. Her medical records revealed injuries that no one could ignore. Bruises mapped across her skin like a desperate language of survival. A broken nose, a black eye. Doctors wrote notes describing her fear, her evasiveness, the way she flinched at loud noises. She had lived with Tate. She had a child with him, and she had lived inside his violence. Detectives flew to Texas with purpose. They had more than suspicion, they had reason. When McKnight opened her door, fear flickered across her face. She wasn't just surprised. She looked like someone who had been bracing for this moment for a long time. She tried to play dumb at first, tried to shield herself behind practiced silence. But detectives can sense when the truth is beating inside someone like a trapped heart. They pressed gently, mentioning Shannon's name, mentioning the woods behind the apartments, mentioning the whispers that linked Tate to the crime. And just like a dam breaking, the truth came spilling out. McKnight confessed she was the anonymous caller. She confessed she knew exactly where Shannon's body was buried because Tate had told her himself, bragging about it in the aftermath of the killing. She confessed she had concealed the truth for years because he beat her, threatened her, manipulated her into silence. She described the violence with a hollow voice, as if the memories weren't just painful, but poisonous. Every bruise was another reason she hadn't spoken earlier. Every threat was another chain holding the truth hostage. But after one particularly brutal beating, she realized she had nothing left to lose. She left Tate, fled home, and dialed the phone twice. Detectives listened as she recounted what Tate had claimed. He believed Shannon was pregnant, 13 years old, barely beginning her life. McKnight said Tate took the girl to the woods, choked her, shot her, and buried her. The story was horrific, but it matched the evidence. Still, investigators needed more. They needed Tate to talk. When they sat him in the interrogation room, they already knew most of the truth. They just needed him to slip. Tate acted like a man familiar with the criminal justice system. He kept his answers short. He avoided specifics. He admitted to seeing Shannon that day, a detail that linked him directly to her final hours, but insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. But then he said something he shouldn't have. He claimed they couldn't prove anything because they didn't know exactly when she died. Only one person would know that: the killer. Detectives exchanged looks, saying nothing, letting Tate's words hang in the stale room air. He realized too late what he'd implied. But the moment had already passed. The logic was clear. Coupled with McKnight's confession, it was enough. Tate was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Back in Louisiana, the case dormant for so long surged back to life. Prosecutors prepared for trial. Witnesses were contacted. Evidence was cataloged. The community, still scarred from 2 years of uncertainty, braced for the truth. The trial lasted 4 days. Witness after witness took the stand. Detectives recounted the search, the phone calls, the discovery of the remains. Forensic experts explained the bullet wound in Shannon's skull. McKnight described the whispered confessions Tate had shared with her in moments of cruelty and arrogance. And through it all, Tate sat quietly, listening as strangers spoke about the darkest corners of his life. The jury deliberated for less than half an hour, a blink in courtroom time, before returning with a verdict. Guilty. Tate was sentenced to life in prison. For the Capers family, the verdict was both an ending and a beginning. They had spent 2 years searching for their daughter, and another 2 years searching for her killer. The truth had cost them immeasurably. But now, at least, they had answers. They had justice. And they had a place to visit, a grave that carried her name instead of a question mark. But justice does not erase grief. It does not return time. It does not heal the fractures that ripple through a family when a child is taken. Instead, it provides structure, a shape for pain to occupy, a truth to hold on to when memories overwhelm. Shannon's story resonated far beyond her community. It became a reminder that even in quiet towns with friendly faces, darkness can live in the shadows. It reminded detectives that cold cases can thaw unexpectedly, that the right phone call can resurrect the truth. And it reminded people everywhere that evil doesn't always arrive in the form of a stranger sometimes. It lives just down the street. As Tate began his life sentence, detectives reflected on the chain of events that had led to his conviction. If McKnight had stayed silent, if that cigar had landed a foot in another direction, if investigators had given up after the first search, Shannon might still be lost in the woods today. But truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, even when buried. In the weeks following Maurice Tate's conviction, the weight of the verdict settled over Claiborne Parish like a slow, heavy fog. People spoke about the case in hushed tones in grocery store aisles, in church parking lots, in the break rooms of local jobs, each retelling shaped by relief, shock, or the quiet ache that comes from realizing how close tragedy had lived to their doorsteps. The community was changed, and yet the world around them kept going, as if unaware that their sense of safety had been permanently altered. For the Capers family, the days after the trial were a blur of emotions that couldn't be placed neatly into words. There was grief, of course sharp, unforgiving, spreading through every part of life like cold water seeping into cracks. But alongside that, grief was something else. The soft, fragile shape of closure. It didn't erase the pain, but it offered a kind of anchor in a storm that had raged for 4 long years. Shannon was finally laid to rest properly. Her family could stand beside a grave that bore her name, not a missing person flyer. They could speak to her spirit without wondering where her body lay. They could begin mourning their daughter instead of the uncertainty that had held them prisoner. Yet the story didn't end with the burial. Cold cases have a way of lingering not only in evidence lockers and police reports, but in the minds of those who lived through them. Detectives who worked Shannon's case carried the weight of it long after the courtroom emptied. To understand why it affected them so deeply, you have to step inside the long shadow these investigations cast over the people who pursue them. Detective Booth didn't forget the day he first received the missing person report. He remembered the look on Shannon's mother's face, that mixture of hope and dread that only parents of missing children carry. He remembered the sinking feeling as days passed with no sign of the girl. And he remembered the moment the skull was discovered in the woods, sketched in his memory with haunting accuracy. For Detective Chris Smith, the anonymous phone calls were the turning point. There was something about the voice, the tension carried between syllables, the desperate insistence that they return to the woods that stayed with him long after the case closed. Detectives are trained to listen not only to what people say, but to how they say it. In this case, the truth had been hiding inside the trembling breath of a woman, begging to be freed from her own secret. Sharnice McKnight's confession was more than a piece of evidence. It was a window into the complexity of human fear. Many outsiders wondered why she hadn't spoken up sooner. They didn't understand what it means to live with violence, to measure every word, every decision, by the likelihood of survival. She was young, frightened, trapped in a relationship ruled by physical and emotional domination. To her, silence wasn't complicity, it was survival. But survival has a cost. Carrying the truth for years had carved deep lines into her conscience. When she finally spoke, it wasn't because she wanted revenge. It was because she couldn't bear the weight anymore. The fear of Tate might have held her hostage for a time, but the guilt of knowing the fate of a murdered child eventually became heavier. Her testimony became the bridge between rumor and reality, turning whispers into evidence. Without her voice, the case might never have resurfaced. Shannon's remains might have stayed buried beneath years of leaves and decay, her disappearance forever a mystery. Yet even as the trial came to a close, and Tate was locked behind bars, certain questions continued to echo through the minds of investigators and neighbors alike. One of the most painful of those questions was whether Shannon had truly been pregnant. The possibility shook the foundations of the case. If true, it meant a 13-year-old girl had not only lost her life, but had been carrying an unimaginable burden. Detectives pursued the allegation carefully, searching for medical confirmation, traces of fetal remains, or consistent testimony. But the condition of Shannon's skeletal remains made some answers impossible to confirm with certainty. The Earth had claimed too much. Still, motive doesn't require scientific proof, only belief. And Maurice Tate, according to McKnight, believed Shannon was pregnant. That belief alone was enough to trigger his rage. But even beyond motive, the brutality of the crime revealed something deeper. A man willing to exert control through violence, not only over adult women, but even over a child. As the courtroom emptied and Tate was escorted out, some of the jurors felt chills. Listening to the testimony had been one thing. Seeing him walk past, with his eyes hollow and unreadable, was another. For them, the verdict wasn't difficult. The evidence had spoken clearly, but the emotional toll of reaching that verdict lingered long after the trial ended. The trial transcripts described Tate as expressionless. He didn't protest loudly, he didn't lash out. He simply absorbed the sentence quietly, as if the weight of his crime had settled onto him only in that final moment. Life in prison, no parole, no second chance. The rest of his days confined to a concrete cell and steel bars. Inside Claiborne Parish Detention Center, Tate became another inmate in a long line of offenders. But the guards who processed him talked in low tones about the case. Even hardened officers felt the sting of a child's death, especially one buried in their own community. It was the kind of crime that sticks to the soul. Meanwhile, Shannon's classmates, now older, some near adulthood, carried their own private scars. Many remembered the day she went missing. They remembered the assemblies, the counselors who visited the school, the teachers who tried not to cry in front of students. They remembered whispering her name during recess, wondering where she had gone. For them, the discovery of her body resurfaced childhood fears that had never truly disappeared. Some of her closest friends struggled with guilt, irrational but deeply human. They wondered if they should have walked home with her that day, or if there was a sign they had missed. They replayed their last conversations, picking apart small details as if fate could be rewritten by memory. Trauma works like that. It folds itself into old wounds and reopens them years later, demanding attention. For Shannon's family, life moved at the slow pace of healing. Her mother visited the cemetery often, kneeling beside the grave, whispering memories she hadn't been able to speak during the awful years of not knowing. Her father took longer to visit. He couldn't bear the weight of seeing her name carved into stone. He struggled with anger at Tate, at the world, at himself for not being able to protect his daughter. Their home still held pieces of her. Photographs that once brought joy now brought tears. School notebooks, childhood drawings, a hairbrush still holding strands of brown hair. They had a room filled with relics of a life interrupted. Some families pack those things away quickly. Others keep them, clinging to a sense of connection. The Capers family kept Shannon close. Investigators often talk about how cases like this shift the energy of an entire department. Some detectives moved on to other assignments. Others found themselves revisiting the case file late at night, reading through statements and timelines, not because they doubted the verdict, but because certain cases simply stay with you. The brutality, the youth of the victim, the years she remained hidden in the woods, these things linger. Even after Tate's incarceration, police received occasional calls from people who wondered if the department was sure they had the right man. Cold cases attract conspiracy theories, but detectives dismissed these rumors. The evidence, the confession, the details known only to Tate and McKnight, they formed a structure of truth that could not be shaken. Still, the community's sorrow persisted. On anniversaries of Shannon's disappearance, small gatherings formed near the woods. People brought flowers, candles, and handwritten notes, Some brought balloons, letting them float into the sky as a way of releasing grief. Reporters occasionally revisited the case, interviewing detectives, retelling the story, reminding viewers that justice, even when delivered, cannot replace a stolen life. And yet, in the years that followed, something unexpected began to happen. Shannon's story became a catalyst for change, not legislative, not procedural, but emotional. Parents became more vigilant. Communities paid more attention to missing children. Teachers became more alert to signs of distress. The loss of Shannon sharpened the awareness of an entire parish. Survivors of domestic violence in the region found strength in McKnight's eventual courage. Advocacy groups cited her as an example of someone who, despite years of abuse, found a way to break free and speak the truth. Her bravery, though delayed by trauma, helped bring justice to a murdered child. That reality resonated deeply with women who felt trapped in their own situations. The Capers family, though shattered, eventually found a way to tell their story. They spoke at local events, urging people to report suspicious behavior, to speak out even when fear tries to silence them. Their voices carried a weight that statistics and studies never could. They were the living embodiment of loss and resilience. As years passed, the place where Shannon's remains were found changed, too. The woods grew thicker. Nature reclaimed the disturbed soil. Leaves piled over the ground each fall, hiding the scars of the shallow grave. If you walk through those woods today, you might never know they once held the remains of a young girl. The land holds its secrets quietly. But memory doesn't fade with the seasons. Stories live longer than landscapes. Detectives who have since retired still remember her case. They recall the search grids, the smell of the forest, the shock of seeing the skull lying on the ground, as if the forest itself had revealed its buried truth. They remember the second phone call the moment they realized someone out there was desperate to be heard. They remember McKnight's trembling voice in that Texas apartment, and the way her confession reshaped everything. They remember Tate's slip in the interrogation room, the pivot point that sealed his fate. They remember the jury filing back into the courtroom, their solemn expressions revealing the verdict before a single word was spoken. The story of Shannon Capers is one of those rare cases where the truth was almost buried forever, saved only by coincidence, persistence, and a single moment of courage from someone who had been living in fear. Time has a way of softening sharp edges, but it never erases them. In the years after Maurice Tate began serving his life sentence, life in Claiborne Parish continued slowly, cautiously, as if the community feared moving too quickly might disturb the ghosts that tragedy had left behind. But even as new families moved into the neighborhood and old ones drifted away, the memory of what happened to 13-year-old Shannon Capers remained woven into the quiet of that northern Louisiana town. People still spoke her name, though not always loudly. They spoke it when warning their children to stay close to home. They spoke it when remembering the fragility of life. They spoke it during moments of reflection, when the weight of loss pressed against the walls of memory. Shannon didn't become a statistic. She became a symbol of what can happen in the brief, unguarded moments of ordinary life. Detectives who had worked the case retired one by one, but they carried the story with them long after signing their last reports. Some of them described the sensation of hearing the phone ring late at night years after the case closed, and feeling a jolt of adrenaline, as if part of them still expected the voice of the anonymous caller. Trauma does not belong only to victims. It finds its way into the hearts of those who chase truth through the darkest corners of the human experience. Detective Booth once mentioned in an interview that he still revisited the memory of that moment in the woods when the skull was discovered. Not because he wanted to relive it, but because moments like that redefine a detective's relationship with his work. "You don't forget a case like this," he said quietly. "You don't forget a child." Detective Chris Smith also admitted that he never fully stopped analyzing the tone of the anonymous caller's voice. He said there was something unmistakable in it, not just fear, but a kind of sorrow, as if she were trying to save both the victim and herself. He said it taught him to listen differently in future cases, to listen for what pain sounds like when disguised as certainty. For Sharnice McKnight, life after the trial was complicated. She had escaped the violence of her past, but she still carried the emotional scars of surviving a man capable of killing a child. She tried rebuilding her life in Texas, focusing on raising her child and distancing herself from the horrors she had endured. Some community members judged her harshly for waiting years to come forward. But those who understood domestic violence recognized the strength inside her confession, strength that had taken years to grow. Her confession hadn't just solved a case. It had shaken loose the truth that had been buried not only in the woods, but in the silence of her own suffering. Tate's violence had stretched far beyond physical harm. It had manipulated her mind, her choices, her sense of safety. Overcoming that kind of control is not simple. It requires a breaking point, and hers came with injuries severe enough to force her home, battered and afraid. But sometimes, fear becomes the catalyst for truth. The scars left behind on Shannon's family were more permanent. Her mother struggled with grief that sank into her bones. Some mornings, she woke expecting to hear Shannon's voice drifting through the house, only to remember the brutal truth. Her father carried his pain differently in the quiet moments, in the tightening of his jaw whenever he passed the woods where his daughter had been found, in the silence he wrapped around himself to keep from breaking in public. Their suffering wasn't visible to everyone. People offered condolences, casseroles, and comforting words. But true grief is not something others can fix. It is something a family learns to carry, not because the weight gets lighter, but because they get stronger. Shannon's story echoed through the halls of local schools for years. Teachers referenced her case when talking about safety. Counselors mentioned her name when helping students cope with fear or loss. Students who were too young to remember the case directly still grew up feeling its presence. They heard stories from older siblings, from friends, from adults who spoke about Shannon as if she were still part of the community. And, in a way, she was. The woods where her body was found became an unspoken landmark, not marked by signs, not acknowledged in public maps, but remembered by those who lived nearby. People rarely wandered deep into that area anymore. Some said the woods felt different after the discovery, as if the air was thicker, the silence heavier. Whether superstition or instinct, something about that place changed permanently. The land had held a secret too terrible to forget. Detectives know that some cases never leave them. They take pieces of the job home, sometimes in files, sometimes in memories, sometimes in nightmares. Shannon's case left pieces in all three. The unsolved portion had haunted them for years, and even the solution brought its own lingering emotions. But amidst the sorrow, something else took root. A deep respect for the fragile, unpredictable way justice sometimes moves. Cold cases don't always end with answers. So when they do, investigators hold those victories close, even when the victory comes at a devastating cost. Prosecutors who worked the trial often talked about the striking efficiency of the jury. Less than half an hour to convict a man of second-degree murder. That speed did not come from haste, it came from clarity. The evidence told a story impossible to dismiss, a story about a man who believed a 13-year-old girl was pregnant and made a choice rooted in rage and fear. A story about violence, a story about power, a story about a child whose life should have been just beginning. The courtroom transcript recorded Tate's reaction to the verdict as minimal, a slight shift in posture, a tightening around the mouth. Some jurors said later that his expression chilled them more than anger would have. There was an eerie acceptance in his face, as if he knew deep down the verdict had been sealed long before the jury returned. In prison, Tate became another inmate among many, but his name carried weight in whispers, not because he was notorious, but because the nature of his crime caused other prisoners to keep their distance. Inmates have their own sense of justice, their own systems of morality. Crimes against children generate their own kind of judgment behind bars. For the Capers family, the years after the trial required rebuilding. They leaned on each other the way people do when life has taken something irreplaceable. They learned how to speak about Shannon in past tense without falling apart. They learned how to celebrate holidays without the empty chair overwhelming them. And they learned how to live in a world where their daughter's story was known by thousands who had never met her. Her memory became something they tended carefully, not unlike a fragile flame. They kept her photos in the living room. They kept her notebooks in a drawer. They kept her laugh alive in stories told at family gatherings. Pain lingered, but love lingered too, stronger and more enduring. Shannon's story also became part of wider conversations about missing children, about domestic violence, about how communities can help prevent tragedies. Advocacy groups referenced her case when explaining the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. Some used her story as an example of why victims of abuse must be listened to, even when they don't speak loudly. Her story became more than the details of her murder. It became a reminder of how many people can be touched by a single act of violence. Years later, when looking back on the case, reporters described it as a haunting example of what happens when silence becomes a cage. Shannon had disappeared in broad daylight, and no one had seen what happened. Her body had been hidden in a shallow grave near the place she called home. A woman had known the truth but had been too terrified to speak. And for 2 long years, a child's fate had remained buried in the earth. But truth does not stay buried forever. It pushes through doubt. It rises past fear. It finds its way to light even through something as mundane as a chief's discarded cigar landing next to a skull. When the forest gave up its secret, it set the rest of the story in motion. And now, with the case long since closed, the land has quieted again. New layers of leaves cover the spot where Shannon was found. The trees have grown thicker. The roots have woven themselves deeper into the soil. Nature does what it always does. It heals, it hides, it continues. But memory remains. In documentaries like this, in whispered conversations, in the hearts of those who loved her, Shannon's story endures because it deserves to be remembered. It endures because truth matters. It endures because even in tragedy, there is a lesson about resilience, justice, and the power of a single voice spoken anonymously, spoken fearfully, but spoken nonetheless. A voice that pointed detectives to a patch of Louisiana woods. A voice that broke a cycle of abuse. A voice that brought justice to a child who could no longer speak for herself. And as we close this story, we honor Shannon by ensuring her name is never lost again. You are watching Disturbed Intent, and if stories like this matter to you, if you believe cold cases deserve to be reopened, re-examined, and remembered, then take a moment to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit the subscribe button so you never miss another real, non-fiction, true crime documentary. Because the more attention we bring to stories like Shannon's, the fewer victims are forgotten, and the fewer truths stay buried.